Have you ever considered that a nation's intelligence apparatus could act as its government before the state even existed? This document completely shifts the perspective on intelligence in a state under threat. Welcome to Strategic Labs. Like and subscribe for more strategic insights. Today, we're breaking down Edward H. Whitmore's extensive research to really understand a system that was built not just for geopolitical maneuvering, but for absolute, sheer survival.
I mean, seriously, how does a state build an intelligence apparatus before it even has a state? It's a pretty disruptive question, right? And it sets a sharp, highly analytical tone for everything we're about to cover. We are stepping into an environment where survival and statecraft are, practically speaking, the exact same thing.
All right, so here is the bottom line up front. We're dissecting the top 3 most disruptive insights from Whitmore's text today. First up, survival before statehood. Second, the structure of the intelligence triad and the doctrine of preemption. And third, the catastrophic cost of internal rivalry. Let's get right to it.
Okay, Pillar 1, survival before statehood.
You see, Israeli intelligence wasn't just some bureaucratic afterthought. It was literally the crucible that allowed the state to form in the first place. Back in the 1920s, under the British Mandate, dispersed and vulnerable Jewish communities formed the Hagana, which was this clandestine defense organization. But, as we know, defense is completely blind without information. So by the Arab Revolt from 1936 to 1939, this really rudimentary intelligence wing was actively mapping hostile groups and British enforcement mechanisms. Fast forward to 1948, when formal statehood was declared, all these fragmented underground networks had to rapidly centralize to face an all-out war.
And this brings us to what is probably a brilliant distillation of the document's core thesis. Whitmore writes that intelligence was not a luxury, but a fundamental tool of existence. Just think about that. Every single covert transmission, every reconnaissance mission, was driven by sheer existential desperation. If they didn't anticipate threats, they literally faced destruction.
So the crucial takeaway here is that groups like the Hagana, alongside others like the Irgun and Lehi, basically had to pioneer human intelligence, out of pure necessity. Because they weren't allowed to have a formal military under the British Mandate, these deeply resource-strapped networks used local informants, scouts, and coded broadcasts to map out the socio-political landscape. It was a steep learning curve of trial and error for sure, but it laid the operational blueprint for everything that followed.
Moving right along the Pillar 2, the intelligence triad and preemptive doctrine.
So how is this actually structured today? Well, the modern apparatus emerged from those early survival days, adopting a highly proactive stance. Whitmore breaks it down into an interlocking triad of agencies. You've got Mossad, which is tasked with foreign intelligence and global covert operations. Then there's Shin Bet, handling domestic and internal security. And finally, Aman, providing strategic early warnings and battlefield awareness. Together, they form this vibrant, continuously recalibrating system designed to counter some seriously multifaceted threats.
But here's where things get really complicated. These agencies have totally different institutional cultures, and that's derived directly from their distinct mandates. Mossad operates in the global shadows, right? They're driven by bold, complex overseas missions and high-risk maneuvers. Shin Bet, on the flip side, operates right inside the country. They are constrained by domestic caution, legal frameworks, and the absolute need for internal stability. The source highlights that this dynamic creates an inherent, almost unavoidable friction between the two agencies.
Now, despite those cultural differences, the entire apparatus is unified by one core philosophy, the doctrine of preemptive action. The text explains this neutrally, as essentially a calculated gamble. Because the state has historically faced constant existential threats, the intelligence community operates on the very simple calculation that waiting passively for an attack ensures destruction. So, the doctrine actually mandates neutralizing threats decisively before they can ever materialize. Let's actually walk through how this works in practice when a targeted strike or assassination is proposed. It's an incredibly meticulous, multi-dimensional process. Step 1 is multi-agency intelligence fusion, where they combine human, signal, and cyber intelligence. Step 2 is an operational feasibility assessment, basically asking, can we actually pull this off without unacceptable collateral damage? Step 3 requires senior political authorization, often going right up to the Prime Minister, which really shows how deeply intelligence is tied to statecraft. And finally, Step 4 is surgical execution.
But, and this is a massive point, these actions come at an immense cost.
Whitmore's book is very clear that extrajudicial killings and preemptive strikes carry heavy strategic and moral baggage.
The immediate tactical gain of removing a threat is constantly weighed against severe international backlash, sovereignty violations, and profound ethical dilemmas. The source impartially notes that these operations regularly spark global condemnation, not to mention intense internal legal debates regarding the erosion of due process.
Which brings us to Pillar 3, the catastrophic cost of internal rivalry.
We've talked about how these agencies are supposed to work together, but what happens when they don't? Well, as the document reveals, siloed intelligence and internal friction prove to be as deadly as any external adversary. The starkest example of this is the lead-up to the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Aman was relying heavily on signal intelligence and military movements, practically discounting human intel altogether. Mossad, on the other hand, had actually gathered very nuanced human intelligence warnings about an impending Arab coalition attack. But due to mistrust, agency egos, and bureaucratic inertia, Mossad's warnings went largely unheeded by Aman.
And the fallout was devastating. The failure to synthesize this intelligence across the agencies led directly to massive surprise attacks from Egypt and Syria, resulting in extremely heavy battlefield losses. The author really emphasizes that this compartmentalization and groupthink almost cost the nascent nation its very existence. It was a complete systemic failure of coordination.
But from that catastrophe came some rigorous institutional reforms. Post-1973, they completely overhauled things. They established the National Security Council to formally fuse threat assessments. They formed joint counterterrorism task forces and officially mandated cross-agency intelligence fusion to systematically break down those deadly silos. These incredibly painful lessons essentially created the deeply networked, technologically integrated intelligence enterprise that exists today, one that forces rival agencies to share data in real time.
Which leaves us with this final truly provocative thought. Can a democratic state balance moral accountability with the sheer ruthlessness required for existential survival? It is the central paradox the source material wrestles with, and it's one that continues to define the ongoing reality of intelligence in a state under threat. This is just a preview. For the full deep dive, check out our long-form explainer on the channel. See you in the next one.